Hi and welcome to the Bruce Channel. I'm Bruce and we have another smorgasbord for you. So here we go. By this time next week, two big sporting events will have ended. And there will be winners and losers and quite a few newly rich people. There will also be some rich people who are richer still. In the latter category will be the owners of the horse that wins next Saturday's Kentucky Derby. As I've mentioned from time to time, for quite a while I had an association with horse racing, originally because I thought I wanted to be a jockey, and later I became a race caller. Now, I don't believe in fate, but I am certainly glad that my own less traveled roads led me in a different direction. At any rate, while my interest is now no more than the average person's, like most of us, beginning next Saturday and then continuing for either 2 or 5 weeks, I'll be wondering if we get a Triple Crown winner. I remember as a kid, I'd read each year that it had been such a long time since Citation won all 3 back in 1948. Then the Magnificent Secretariat in 1973 ended a 25-year dry spell. And then just a couple of years later, in 77, Seattle Slew won the Triple, and then the following year, Affirm did it again. So I suppose many of us, I know I did, thought, well, whatever was causing the big dry spell, clearly it's past, so we'll never see that kind of run with no triples again. Except it's now 2015, and there have been a fair number of horses who won the first 2, the Derby and the Preakness, 2 weeks later, but not one of them has gone on to also capture the Belmont Stakes. That's 3 weeks after the Preakness. So here it is, 37 years and counting. By the way, this will be the 141st Derby. The first one was back in 1875. By way of perspective, Mary Todd Lincoln was still alive. So it's quite a tradition, one that I will be keeping in mind on Saturday as I contemplate the merits of adding a little spearmint to my bourbon. All right. By the time the starting gate opens for the Derby, the week's other big sporting event will be over, and although millions of people will watch the race, millions of fans will be either ecstatic or apoplectic or both. I'm talking, of course, of the 3-day carnival that is otherwise known as the NFL Draft. It begins Thursday night, primetime TV, 8 p.m. It wraps up Saturday afternoon, and 32 teams will make their picks or make trades for picks, sometimes moving up, down. They will be best trying to fill their needs. Now, I'd never bet the farm on anything, but this year's first pick might be tempting. It is certainly fascinating to contemplate what might happen. 2 years ago, Florida State's quarterback Jameis Winston won college football's highest award, the Heisman Trophy. This past season, it was won by Oregon quarterback Marcus Mariota, and they are both in this draft. And they could go 1-2. Now, I watched them both throw at the NFL Combine, and both are terrific, but Winston is really amazing. Now, the first pick belongs to Tampa Bay. They don't have a quarterback to speak of, so obviously they're going to take one or the other. There are a couple of incidents in Winston's past that have some questioning whether he's got good character. Meanwhile, Mariota is a Boy Scout. He's exactly the type of fellow you'd hope your daughter dates. Assuming, of course, you are even over the fact that she dates at all. But Jameis Winston ran a style of an offense that's similar to what he will see in the pro game, and he went to Florida State, just up the road from Tampa, so I might not bet the farm, but I'd be maybe willing to take a small second mortgage, saying Tampa goes with Jameis Winston. And of course, I'm a Browns fan, and that means for 15 of 16 years, I've been living a pigskin version of Groundhog Day. So when the season is over, I don't want to hear Sonny and Cher. They say we're young and we don't. All right, that's just some of what comes up this week. But the week just passed had some noteworthy items. And although I may have been a bit of a bottle rocket the last few shows, my plan today was not to light another fuse on glyphosate, and I won't. But a couple new things warrant mentioning. when I got around to reading last Sunday's paper, I found an article from the editors of Consumer Reports. Maybe it was in your paper too. It was called Separating Fact from Fiction about GMOs. It was disappointing. Now, I've always had respect for Consumer Reports, or rather Consumers Union, and that's the organization that actually buys the stuff and tests products and then reviews them in the magazine, Consumer Reports. Now, I don't know firsthand that they're objective, but I've always thought that they were. They don't accept advertising. Moreover, if your product was highly rated, they won't let you use their name in your advertising. Now, I'm not saying I've changed my mind about their objectivity, but it is disappointing to read this article. It's not that there's actually anything incorrect. They just missed half the story. The gist of their story explains that foods can be modified and that we've been eating GMO foods for over 15 years. They also point out that those who produce GMOs say there's no evidence they're harmful. Consumer Reports says correctly that's not proof that they're safe. They also revealed that big companies like Coca-Cola, DuPont, Kraft Foods, PepsiCo, and yes, Monsanto spent a lot of money in Colorado and elsewhere to oppose GMO labeling. And they pointed out that Monsanto's interest was because they produced GMO seeds for crops. But they didn't at all mention what has had me so inflamed, aside from the potential risks that may or not be attendant in the GMO food itself. The fact is that among GMO crops are those that resist glyphosate, meaning Roundups in your food or in your bacon's food. Now, I find it really hard to believe that Consumer Reports was bought off, but really, if this was supposed to lift some of the confusion around the GMO controversy, as journalism, it was a rather incomplete attempt. It missed half the issue. All right, now to a different wrinkle. Last weekend, I got in my car, turned on NPR, and I tuned into the middle of an interview. I don't know who was being interviewed, but I quickly gleaned that he was part of a group calling for Columbia University to fire Dr. Oz from his position at the university as vice chair of the surgery department. Now, it took me a little longer to focus on what was going on, but I do remember these two things. The opposition was because he was sometimes out of the mainstream. He was okay with home remedies sometimes, like that's bad. And that when asked his opinion of Dr. Oz's medical practice, the interviewee blithely replied, "I'm sure he's a fine thoracic surgeon." Well, I didn't think much more of it, but it made the news cycles. And then I got very interested because it turns out the doctors calling for his ouster criticized him for, and I quote from the letter, his baseless and relentless opposition to the genetic engineering of food crops. Ho ho! Then it was announced that Dr. Oz would answer them on his show this week, so of course I had to watch. It aired on Thursday, the 23rd, and as I've said, I'm not a regular viewer of Dr. Oz, but I do see it from time to time. In fact, I mentioned him in my book. Actually, I mentioned the guests when they appeared on his show. So, first, he took to task some of his critics. Yes, they are all doctors. But it would appear they're hired guns. One is a felon. Another has testified on behalf of tobacco companies. Yeah, he's got street cred. During the show, they ran a clip from the old show where he talked about GMOs. In the old clip, I heard him say GMOs may be safe. They may be nutritionally equivalent. But he also said that sometimes the results for things like this aren't always known for years. And that he wasn't against GMOs. He was for GMO labeling, which is exactly what I've been saying the last couple shows. Then he had a guest who discussed Congressman Mike Pompeo's DARK Act, which I've been talking about, and how, if passed, it would restrict your state or community from requiring GMO labeling. And finally, they turned to why, glyphosate. And as I also did, Dr. Oz pointed out that the World Health Organization, just the week before the bill was introduced in Congress, called glyphosate a probable carcinogen. Who knew Dr. Oz watches the Bruce Channel? Or maybe not, because he didn't get into that other point that I've made, that if a food crop is exposed to glyphosate and doesn't die, then the glyphosate has to end up in the food. Anyway, if you did not see his show, I would strongly recommend that you watch it. You can watch it online, and it's only the first 20 minutes or so. Simply go to droz.com. Recent episodes are right there. You can also Google Dr. Oz Fights Back, and that will get you there. And finally, there's a very good reason to go there. At his site, there is a petition you can sign opposing the Dark Act. Folks, a few weeks ago, I said over 90% of us want GMO labeling. On the show, they said it was 92%. Well, look at what's going on. 92% of it. And Dr. Oz is, I'm sure, a millionaire. He's popular. He's got a popular TV show. And Monsanto and the other dark forces and their hired guns are going after him anyway. Think what must be at risk for them. Billions, trillions. Think about that. And if they can get this passed in the face of overwhelming popular opposition, if their corrupt hold on politicians is that strong, then I've got to say this, despite the fact that I'm an idealist, don't bother to vote. Don't vote for Hillary, don't vote for Rand, don't vote for Elizabeth or Jeb or anybody else, because nothing will matter. The dark side will have proven that money trumps all else. In fact, you might want to sell your house and become an expat. This government of the people will have become a vile government of the corporations. Oh, I forgot. Corporations are people too. This land of the free will become very expensive. Hey, let me tell you about my book, Shrink. Or wait, I can let others do it. Welcome back. Remember to like us on Facebook, and on YouTube also. You can write to us at the Bruce Channel at yahoo.com, and if you are on Facebook, if you like us, that's great, but if you would share it, click share. I'd appreciate that a lot. Well, the Dr. Oz show I spoke of was Thursday, the 23rd of April, but that wasn't the only significant thing about that day. I do believe the issue of GMOs and their labeling is incredibly important. And Dr. Oz's effort is important. Certainly more important than the anniversary that passed on Thursday, or it should be. But you know, for some folks, Thursday marked a day they just as soon never happened. Thursday, 30 years earlier, Coca-Cola announced New Coke. The new product. The how and why of it has an incredibly fascinating backstory, and I thought it might be fun to look back on. So, Colonel John Pemberton was a Confederate officer. He was wounded during the war and he became hooked on morphine. Looking for a substitute, he started formulating, and he formulated and registered French wine coca nerve tonic in Atlanta. But Fulton County went dry the next year, so he had to reformulate it without the wine. It sold as a patent medicine at soda fountains, 5 cents a glass, and he said it was good for what ails you. Actually, he didn't say that. What he did say it was good for was dyspepsia, headache, morphine addiction, and impotence. There were no little blue pills. All right, so there were some ownership deals, but let's fast forward to 1945. World War II ended. Coca-Cola had 60% market share. By 1983, it was down to 24%. And Coke executives were worried because, while they still sold more Coke than Pepsi, in supermarkets, you had a choice, Pepsi outsold Coke. It was only because Coke had so many more vending machines and were at restaurants like McDonald's that they maintained the lead, but the lead was shrinking. Now, Pepsi is sweeter, and they had a great marketing campaign, the Pepsi Generation. So, secretly, Coke's chemists formulated, tested, reformulated, retested. They arrived at a formula that was sweeter and beat Pepsi. In fact, it beat the old Coke too, overwhelmingly in secret taste tests. So on April 19th, the company said a major announcement is coming on the 23rd, and that's when they announced they were doing away with the 100-year-old formula. Sacre bleu! By the way, Pepsi loved this. Right after the announcement, I mean, as soon as it was made, Pepsi-Cola gave their employees the rest of the day off. They made it a holiday. And in making the announcement, they also said, by today's action, Coke has admitted that it's not the real thing. Well, despite the taste test, and despite most Coke drinkers, 70% or more, accepting the new Coke, a vocal minority had kittens over it. 12% or so, but they went nuts. One, the people in the South thought it was another example of Yankee meddling. And it is true, in the South. I was born in Atlanta. Coke holds a special place in the heart. For years the saying was, let's go get a Coke. Regardless of what you were actually getting, Dr. Pepper, Pepsi, whatever. Let's go get a Coke. It was almost like soda in the Northeast and pop in the Midwest. It was generic. A group formed in Seattle called Old Cola Drinkers of America, and they lobbied Coke to bring back the old or sell the formula, the original formula, to somebody else. They got over 60,000 phone calls. At a ballpark, a Coca-Cola ad ran on a big screen, and it was booed. And there were protests and boycotts. So less than 3 months after announcing the change, Coke announced they'd bring back the original as Coca-Cola Classic. It was July 11th. ABC, this is great, ABC broke into General Hospital with a special bulletin that they were bringing back old Coke. So years later, new Coke became Coke 2 and was completely discontinued in 2002. Coca-Cola Classic morphed back into Coca-Cola, and after the entire brouhaha, outsold everyone else. There's a fanciful tale that Coke's executives engineered the entire thing. They took away an American icon to build a groundswell for its return, which, if you believe it, that would be sheer genius. But risky, no? About the change and whether it was planned to reinvigorate Coke, the company's president, Donald Keough, said about the entire issue, we're not that dumb and we're not that smart. I believe him. And that's it for this week. May your week, upcoming, be the best one you've ever had.